Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Or if it happens to be your first time here, just want to say welcome especially. I'm Sally, and it means a lot that you've stopped by. Today I'm going to be diving into part 2 of my Pro-Metabolic for Beginners series. And if you haven't already watched part 1, I highly encourage you to do that because that's where we really go over our foundations. And until we can prioritize and implement those foundations, the results that we're going to see, the impact we're going to see of these next steps is going to be pretty marginal, and honestly is going to be missing the point in a sense. So I will make sure to tag that video here somewhere. It'll definitely be linked in the description box. So again, if you haven't watched it, just pause this real quick. You can go review that and then come right back. But today I have 6 different points for you. I'm going to be focusing largely on this idea of whole food supplementation, or prioritizing getting our nutrients, our minerals, and our vitamins from our whole food sources, as well as just some swaps that we can make to build resiliency and prevent stress in the body. And just one more thing, please remember I am not a registered dietitian. This is all just my research that I've done that I want to share with you because I'm really passionate about it, and that I hope that it can kind of jumpstart you in your own research. Please don't forget to like this video if you like what you see. It's a huge help to me, and of course subscribe to the channel so you don't miss part 3 and all of my other videos on this kind of stuff, and just wellness and lifestyle as a whole. But I have 6 different points for you. The first of which is going to be swapping out, when it makes sense, just when it's feasible, but not taking a dogmatic approach, swapping out PUFAs or polyunsaturated fats for saturated fats, especially when cooking, but in general, saturated fats and also monounsaturated fats are going to be a much better choice. So if you are unfamiliar with this conversation, or if you're coming in from the approach of, okay, I heard saturated fats actually aren't good for you, obviously we don't want to go, all out and have just copious amounts of fat in our diet that we wouldn't otherwise have. That's not the point. However, studies have actually shown, and this is where I have a note, that PUFAs can be dangerous when in our bodies because of the oxidative damage that they can do. And one really big example of this is actually our skin's resiliency to the sun, or the effect that the sun has on our skin. It has been shown that people who have diets that are really high in polyunsaturated fats are much more negatively, we'll say, responsive to the sun, much more prone to sunburn, and less of a tan, and they don't recover as well from it. So it's not just, the sun that's doing this damage, but it's a reaction that's happening between what's in our bodies and the sun itself. But that's just one example. There are plenty of things that go on inside our bodies that really are not going to be ideal when we're eating a diet that's really, really heavy in polyunsaturated fats. And that is honestly the reality for most of us, especially if we're eating kind of a conventional American diet. And the one, caveat I would say to this, which I kind of hinted at getting into it first, is I just encourage you not to, take a dogmatic approach to this. There's a big difference in using something like a vegetable oil, such as a sunflower, safflower oil, versus having something like nuts on occasion, or mixing nuts into a baked good or a recipe. Huge difference. Even having a little, bit of nut butter. That's great. Whole food sources, for the most part, are a good thing. We just don't want to overdo it and have spoonfuls and spoonfuls of almond butter all the time. That's probably, anyways, not the best way for us to be getting our calories in. But especially when we see polyunsaturated fats being cooked with, that's when we start to see even more volatility and kind of a negative effect on the body. Some studies have even linked certain levels of, we'll say, polyunsaturated fats with heart disease, which I know kind of rocks the boat a little bit if you're coming from a more conventional approach. I'm just gonna set that out there at this point again, because I don't want to, I suppose, get further into the conversation that I'm really equipped to speak on, but it's definitely an area for research. And easy swaps that you can make in your day-to-day life are going to be cooking with things like butter, with avocado oil. Of course, you need to make sure that your oil is well sourced. That's really a whole nother conversation, because it can be just a whole thing. But avocado oil is good, and olive oil is good. That really is going to be higher in monounsaturated fats. It does have some saturated fat in it, but it's very low in your polyunsaturated fats. Those are all going to be really good cooking sources. Ghee is also great. You could use something like lard or tallow, especially if you are doing something more like frying that's really going to stand up to heat, whereas butter or olive oil has a much lower smoke point. So just some practical suggestions to incorporate on that note. And going into our second point, it is going to be don't ditch dairy. So I guess that's more something that we want to include or change the way we're looking at it. And honestly, this whole dairy conversation, was probably the hardest thing for me to grasp when I first got into this lifestyle, because honestly, I was very, in a lot of countries, people are lactose intolerant by the time they reach adulthood, like no other animals are drinking milk all throughout their lives. That was very much my thought, and I was on board with it causing a lot of inflammation. And don't get me wrong, it is something that a lot of people have sensitivities to, and that's something that we need to bear in mind. My husband, for instance, is definitely sensitive to dairy. We thought it was a lactose thing and that could be part of it, but more recently we figured out that it actually has more to do with the A1 protein, which could be the case for some of you if that happens to be a thing. A lot of dairy now is produced, most dairy now, with cows who have primarily or at least some amount of A1 protein in the milk and not just A2 protein, which is how it used to be. And there's been quite a shift with that, it seems that much more people are susceptible or sensitive, there we go, that's the word I'm looking for, sensitive to dairy than there were previously. So that A1, A2 conversation, again, is something else that could be had, but those dairy sensitivities, that's the point. They are legitimate. We just have to understand that when it comes to a sensitivity, usually it has to do with our own mineral status, with our own, internal status, as opposed to just this food is bad, especially when it is a whole foods source. So now that we've kind of gone over that, what are some ways that maybe we haven't been incorporating dairy into our diets? We could start, so not to just like overload ourselves, because again, we never really want to take an all or nothing approach. Immediately, that's always my inclination, but often it's going to do a little bit more harm than good. So if you haven't been doing dairy and you decide to introduce it, something that I found really worked well for me was adding a little bit of hard cheese to things. Goat's milk is also really great. I know with my husband, for instance, he can eat that without a problem. And I find that my tummy just responds very positively to it. And when I hadn't been eating it for a while or eating dairy for a while, but would eat that, I didn't have any problem at all. And so you can start maybe with some harder cheeses, lower moisture, some goat's cheese, goat's milk, something like that. And then we could actually get into a whole conversation about dairy sourcing and qualifications on dairy. Ideally, anytime we're doing this, we're going to be looking for something, again, staying away from that dogmatic approach. But when we are purchasing something to the best of our abilities, we are going to be looking for something that is going to be grass-fed. And that's because we're going to see different nutrients significantly in dairy from grass-fed cows than cows that are, predominantly grain-fed. And the nutrients in that milk, of course, are going to affect our bodies. Another piece of that puzzle is going to be, if it is possible, we could get into the whole thing about, looking for milk that does not have vitamin D added to it. That is, like I said, that's a conversation in and of itself, talking about why, vitamin D supplementation, while we need vitamin D, that is not always the best direct solution to kind of that piece of the puzzle. So just as a general policy, if it's possible, we don't need to be, getting our vitamin D from our milk. One brand that I found recently that is grass-fed, reasonably priced, and does not use vitamin D, which is really hard to find, is the Heart Dairy. I found that in Harris Teeter, at least. I don't know where else you can find that. And then the other thing, or the obvious thing, probably if you're familiar with this space, is going to be raw dairy. If you have access to it, I need to check out this one local farm that has it, but as a whole, it's really hard where I am in Wilmington to find raw dairy. Also because it's illegal to sell for human consumption in North Carolina, which is ridiculous. But raw dairy is completely different than pasteurized dairy in the sense that there are just all these beautiful, happy, healthy bacteria that live in it that are incredibly good for your gut and that make digestion much easier. It makes it much easier for us to tolerate it, just because of, you know, everything that's in there helping you out in a sense. So that's the second thing, and that ties into the first point about PUFAs, especially if we are, instead of doing, you know, regular dairy, consuming copious amounts of nut milk or oat milk with a ton of additives. You're bringing in those PUFAs from the nut milk, at least, especially, and it can be especially, you know, negative or not ideal for our bodies if we have a lot of kind of gums, random oils and whatnot added to that nut milk. Whereas, you know, God's in a sense wrapped up this beautiful package for us, and you know, given us dairy as it is. But if you do find that you're really sensitive to it, coconut milk can also be a really good alternative. I have found that canned coconut milk usually is best in terms of just being like pure, and if you want to dilute it, you can blend like a jar of coconut milk or a can of coconut milk with the same amount of water and use that as more of a conventional milk substitute. And then also oat milk, but especially if you can make it yourself or you can find one that doesn't have a lot of additives, is probably going to be a good alternative. I feel like I've talked about that forever, so I apologize if I got rambly, but the next one, and many of you I'm sure have heard of this, is going to be Adrenal Cocktails. Now, Adrenal Cocktails are going to consist of some source of potassium, some source of whole food vitamin C, and some source of sodium. And my go-to is usually just some coconut water, some orange juice, that's what I'm looking for. Pulp free is going to be recommended in this case, or is what's recommended, and then a little bit of salt, and of course we want uniodinized salt. We do need iodine in our diets, but getting it from our salt or adding it to our salt actually has an effect on the other minerals in it. And so the benefit of the Adrenal Cocktail is that it provides this nice little package of these minerals, particularly potassium and sodium, that need each other to work, and gives your body a little boost. And really those are things that many of us are not getting enough of, and it's also remineralizing the liquid that we are consuming in that case, which can be really important. So there are lots of great adrenal cocktail recipes. It really doesn't have to be just orange juice and coconut water. Some people like to do like raw cream with it. Some people like to do cream of tartar as their potassium source. My general go-to, that's not what I meant to say. My other kind of adrenal cocktail that I have been liking recently is going to be coconut water. I'll do like cherry juice, and sometimes I'll do a little bit of lime juice and the salt as well. That's a fun twist. You can do pineapple juice, and also even if you're just adding lemon or lime to your water, you're still getting that vitamin C in as well. I'm sorry that I'm having trouble talking. It is 4:30 when I'm filming this, and for any of you who know me, you know my brain shuts off about 4 o'clock, so we're just on time. Next point is going to be diversifying your amino acid profile. So in this day and age, for the most part, we are consuming a lot of muscle meats, and that's it. If we're consuming meat at all, it tends to all be muscle meat. And that means that we are only really getting a part of the picture when it comes to the amino acids that we are consuming. And in order for our bodies to have everything they need to really thrive, it is ideal for us to make sure we are getting, you know, the other part of that picture. And that means including things like collagen and gelatin, or something like bone broth, which is going to be rich in, you know, both of those things. And so I have a number of different recipes for these gelatin gummies, which are just one way to get it in. Bone broth as well. I include that in one of my What I Eat in a Day videos. Is a really great source where you're literally just extracting essentially the nutrients from your bones themselves. So you're getting the collagen, or that gelatin. Collagen is the uncooked version, and then gelatin is the cooked version. There we go. You're getting it all from that natural source. But just understanding that it's not always ideal for people to drink or eat bone broth all the time. You can buy good collagen or gelatin as well and use those in recipes. I always love adding collagen to my coffee, to my smoothies, and I will link both a wonderful collagen and gelatin in the description box below. It is valuable to have both kind of the cooked and uncooked versions in our diets. Next up is going to be to include weekly something like cod or shrimp or oysters. And when it comes to these things, we always want to make sure that it is wild caught. Just in terms of quality, that could be a whole nother conversation. But the reason, or a great reason to prioritize these things, is because they are really high in iodine, which, as I talked about briefly when it comes to salt, it's a very important mineral, and it does a lot of great things for our bodies. But if we add it to our salt, it kind of gets in the way of other minerals and really isn't the most bioavailable way here we go again. It's okay, you can laugh at me, for us to get it. But doing something like wild caught cod, shrimp, or if you like oysters, I do not, I still need to try my smoked oysters. I'm like trying to get over my fear. I feel like they'll actually be good. I just need to like not think about it too hard. I've just tried a raw one and that's, oh my gosh, I couldn't do it. But anyways, great easy way to get iodine into your diet on a regular basis. And the last thing I want to talk about today is the raw vegetable piece. You know, I'm a person, I've talked about this before, who honestly loves kale. I enjoy a kale salad, I enjoy a fresh salad, all that kind of thing. And we don't need to totally cut that out from our diets. But when we eat those things in copious amounts, like we're having a huge kale salad all the time, or adding a bunch of greens to our smoothies all the time, that can actually inhibit digestion. It can interfere with absorption of certain minerals. And while those do, at least on surface level, or when we're looking at the descriptions of them, they include, or they have a lot of vitamins and minerals in them, they're often not going to be in forms that our bodies can really absorb, that are really bioavailable. And so generally speaking, even just cooking those vegetables, if you want to have a lot of them, can be helpful. But I guess the main point from this is realizing that you do not have to consume copious amounts of raw vegetables in order to be healthy. Like eating a huge salad for every meal or even once a day is not the best approach to a thriving body, to thriving health as a whole. That's a good way to leave yourself ultimately feeling deprived and potentially with some nutrient deficiencies, in one part because it doesn't have everything we need, and in other part because it can actually interfere with absorption. So that's just my note on that. Next week, hopefully I will be a little bit more coherent, but I'm going to get a little bit more into, we'll say the minute details, things that I am supplementing outside just whole food. We will talk about beef liver. I decided to leave that for next week because it is a bit more specific. We'll talk about things like magnesium, etc. Just get into that whole conversation. But I hope that you liked today's video. If you do, again, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments if there's anything in particular you would like to see. But aside from that, I will see y'all next time. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.